In 1998, about October, I brought in a really well-known CEO to replace me. I stepped into the chairman's role, and about a month later, that brand new minted CEO comes into my office and he says, I think we need to close the company. So I said, I'll get it taken care of. So I went out to the market, raised the capital, put together a term sheet to buy us for $122 million.
Take us back to the formation of Teladoc.
Byron Brooks was one of the team members. When we went to Kilimanjaro, Byron was an electrical engineer, medical doctor. The night before summit, Byron is in his tent. I saw the lights on. We were supposed to be going to sleep. And I say, what are you doing? And he said, I've got patients back in the U.S. I need to take care of them. You can do that? You can talk to patients on the phone and treat them remotely? And he goes, yeah, I have their medical record right here. And I went, that's a business model. I'm sitting in my office. It's probably 2005. We probably have 250, 300,000 patients nationwide. Ruthie walks into my office, and she never does when I'm in a meeting. So I already know something's up. She whispers in my ear, the DEA is here with guns and badges.
Okay, so for today's Maverick Mind episode, we have Michael Gorton, who I'm going to have Larry introduce. And I've had the pleasure of speaking with Michael multiple times now. We actually just got done finishing recording a super special episode that y'all will be able to find on the Farzad channel. But just one of the most talented, nicest, down-to-earth guys. Seems like my biggest takeaway after the interview y'all did was what hasn't this guy done?
Exactly.
So give us a little bit of knowledge, yeah.
There are not many guys that I know who have a law degree, an engineering degree, and a physics degree.
Yeah.
I mean, who does that? And who has this incredible career of firstly working for one of these electric generation companies, one of these big utilities, power utilities. And then after a stellar career there of 6 or 7 years as his sort of first career, then he goes and he invents an ISP. Now, nobody knows what an ISP is anymore, but that's what we used to use to access the internet, an ISP. And he created one of the first and one of the biggest ISPs in the country. And having done all that, he sold that up. And so being an entrepreneur and having, built one of the first great ISPs, he then created telemedicine. It's so interesting, his stories of telemedicine. Anyway, Michael is a dear friend who knows everybody who is anybody in the world. By the way, he's great friends with most of the astronauts because he was crazy about space flight, and his space flight stories are quite something. I mean, he's just an all-around outstanding guy. And so today, he spends his life mentoring young people. He does a great job at it. So he's one of my favorite people.
He's great. Yeah, one of my favorite people that I've met and I've had the pleasure to interface with. And I think y'all are really going to enjoy this episode because this one is going to be one of the more engaging ones we've had on this channel, period. Not even on just the Maverick Mind. So I hope y'all enjoy the conversation between Larry and Michael.
So, Michael, in talking to you, I don't know where to begin. I mean, it's like you're multiple people in one body.
Uh-oh.
We're talking, and then all of a sudden you tell me this about your background and then that about your background. I don't know where to begin. So, not only do you have a law degree, but you have an engineering degree.
Yeah.
And not only do you have a law...
Don't forget my physics degree.
I'm getting there. What drove you to have all these degrees? And do you just collect degrees?
No. I like to think about when I was a kid in the Philippines, Neil and Buzz walked on the moon. A few days later, I went to my Boy Scout leader, Colonel Talley, and I said, I want to be that guy on Mars. And Colonel Talley said, well, you got to have a life plan. I didn't know. My dad didn't have a degree. My mom didn't have a degree. I didn't know what a life plan was. And so we wrote it down. He said, think about Buzz Aldrin and the degrees that he had, and Neil Armstrong and Mike Collins. He said, you got to be better than those guys. What? And so we put together this plan where I was going to become an engineer, then a scientist, then a medical doctor. That was the plan that I made when I was 11. And I stuck to it pretty much until about 30.
Wow. So you were somewhat of an army brat, and that's how you got into contact with Colonel Tully.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
I was an Air Force brat. My dad was a sergeant. So Tally, of course, lived on base. We lived off base in the in the drags, but yeah.
So your early life must have been a lot of traveling, a lot of moving around.
Yep, every 18 months. And I think if you're an Air Force brat, you either become reclusive because you don't know how to get out and make the communication,
right?
Or you become very outgoing. And everywhere you go, you got to find friends. You got to build relationships fast.
Right.
And that's what I became.
Right. So we start with you as, child of you're an Air Force brat or an Army brat.
Air Force.
Air Force brat. And you very influenced by Colonel Tully. By the way, this is not a new story to me. I have several friends who are Air Force brats who form this very strong relationship with the mentor. It's quite an interesting story. So you returned to the United States after all these travels.
Correct.
And you settle in where?
Well, I think settle. That's not something that happens there.
But your family did say.
Yeah, let's see. My dad was at the Pentagon. Can you imagine a sergeant at the Pentagon? Colonels are kick-arounds in the Pentagon.
Right.
My dad was at the Pentagon when he decided to retire. And even though he had grown up in Vermont, San Antonio, Texas is where he decided he wanted to go after retirement. And so we moved to San Antonio. And I graduated from high school. I think it was in the middle of my junior year when we moved to San Antonio. So I graduated in San Antonio and then went off to University of Texas right here in Austin.
Right.
Yeah.
And your first degree was?
Engineering.
All right. As per the plan.
Right.
And you're now executing the plan.
Right. And I was poor, so I had to work full time, paying my way through engineering school. And when I finished engineering school, I went to work for a power company. But the degree plan wasn't over with. And by the way, in engineering school, we had a professor who said, the engineers who are going to be successful are the ones who are great communicators and can write. And so I did. Engineering degrees don't usually get a minor, but I got a minor in English because I thought, okay, I'm going to listen to this man. He's a smart guy. And so undergrad was engineering and English. And then I went to work for a power company and at night did a graduate degree in physics.
Wow. And we're going to get into the energy part of it, but the English degree is credit is very important because we're going to get to your one of your other professions, which is writing books. And we'll talk about those books. Just, it's one becomes starry-eyed to see all these professions in one, and you practice most of these professions, starting with your engineering work. And you're building energy. You're building alternate energy structures, even in those days. So, talk about that.
At the power company, the CEO was an electrical engineer with a law degree, and somehow I got connected to him. So he let me do things. And as a young engineer, the coolest project at the power company was a brand new nuclear power plant that was under construction. And I asked if I could go work on it, and they found a place for me. So I had
just stop. How did you form a relationship with the CEO of an energy company when you're a brand new employee?
Yeah. I started doing things for the power company that other people weren't doing. One of the things that I did was, at the time, we had these meter readers running all over the place, reading meters. And if people didn't pay their electricity bill, we had to send somebody to pull it. And then when they paid it, they had to go back. And I thought, we can do all this remotely. We can turn it on, turn it off. We can read it remotely. So I built a system like that for the power company and got kind of on the radar of of the CEO. And this was a big company. It was 30,000 employees. But Earl Nye was the CEO, and, I'd run into him on the elevator, and he'd ask me how things are going. And he again, I was the sergeant's kid, so he was the giant capitalist in the sky to me. It was I love those short bursts of elevator time.
Wow. There are not many newbies in an energy company that's going to talk up to the CEO.
Right.
But I think this is kind of the theme through your life.
Yes.
And we'll see it develop as you
and just to give you a sense of that, the chief engineer at that power company was a guy named Ernie Holcomb. And I was about 8 years into my career there. I had finished my graduate degree in physics. I had finished my law degree. And they were doing a downsizing. And the way that power company did a downsizing was they said, let's offer people money to leave. You know what happens when you do that? The people who can go somewhere else and work, they take the money.
Yeah.
And I wasn't thinking about leaving because I was on a fast track to the top. But one of the engineers that was working for me was going to leave. So I went to the chief engineer and I said, I need to keep this guy. He's really valuable to me. He's a great coder. He's a great engineer. He's a great thinker. And he's just leaving for $2,000 more a year. And Ernie said, he looked at me and he said, we're the power company. We don't need great engineers.
Wow.
Let him go. And I just sat back in my seat and I went, okay. I went home that night and thought about it. And the next morning, I took the buyout.
You know why power companies don't need great people?
They're not doing innovation. They're not doing great.
Do you know why they're not doing innovation?
Tell me.
I will teach you. Because power companies, energy companies in this country do not earn money by engineering. They earn money by whatever they spend, they get added a profit on, and then they get reimbursed for that amount of money.
That is correct.
So the only purpose in life is to spend more money in order to earn more money.
Sounds like healthcare.
Very similar, very similar. And we'll talk about that in due course in one of our conversations. But yeah, so you understood the paradigm, you understood the equation of the energy company, and you moved on. So where did you move on to?
I did.
Now you're an engineer, a trained lawyer. You're not licensed, but a trained lawyer, and you're what else did you do?
And a physicist.
And a physicist.
Yeah.
So having all of that, you decided to do what?
Well, when I was finishing law school, which is around the time I left the power company, I did an international trade class. And one of my friends from engineering school was from Mexico. And I said, hey, I'm going to send you 3 computers. I just need to go through the export of the U.S., import into Mexico. You can do whatever you want with them. So I did all that. I wrote my paper, got my grade in that international trade class. And when I left the power company, I realized he sold all those computers and told me he made money on it. And I said, that's great. I'm glad you did, Manuel. And I got to thinking about the fact that I needed something to do. And so I called him and I said, I'm going to send you more computers, but this time we're going to do business. Yeah. So we started building an international trade business, and it got bigger, and I started doing specialized computers. And
this is while you were at the you'd already left.
This was how I spent that money they gave me when I left.
So this is your first business?
It was we called it G Squared Computers. And Manuel Galeazzi was his name. And I was Gorton. So we had G Squared. Yeah. And so we started sending computers around the world. I started advertising. And when I did, I found criminals, people that specialized in tricking you.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter how smart you are. If they're trying to constantly figure out how to beat your methods. And they did. It was pretty rough for a little while. I was making a lot of money, and then all of a sudden, just criminals came in and started taking everything. And around the time that was happening, in the early 90s, I saw an article that said the internet was being moved into the private sector. And I had helped build the internet for University of Texas at Dallas because my graduate work required communication around the world quickly. And I thought, you know what, I could build an internet company. So that's what I did next, was took that knowledge, built what at the time was called an internet service provider, or ISP.
Right.
And all of a sudden we had rooms full of modems that were squawking and lighting up. And it's quite fascinating in the beginning. But, the internet, in the beginning, it was just people doing tiny little pieces of data back and forth. But I started thinking, what can we really do with the internet? And telephone calls. So if you were in South Africa and I was in Dallas and we wanted to talk on a phone in the early 90s, we would use these very expensive piece of equipment called a Class 5 switch.
Yeah.
And I would dial Larry's phone number, and a switch would close in Dallas, and then switches all the way across the Atlantic Ocean down through Africa to Johannesburg would close. And all of a sudden, we would have a dedicated copper wire between Dallas and Johannesburg where we could talk. And it would cost $15 a minute or some insane amount. And with the internet, we could put 10,000, 20,000 phone calls on that same copper wire.
But that meant that the bandwidth that you were driving was sufficient to carry those calls.
Right.
So how did you accumulate that bandwidth that early in the cycle?
Well, so voice over IP actually uses great compression.
Yeah.
And the reality is that copper wire was capable of a lot more.
Yeah.
It's just the Class 5 switches along the way. I mean, in the beginning, how do you make a phone call? You have a dedicated copper wire. We see those really old movies where there's operators, pushing the wires in, and those operators got replaced by Class 5 switches. But a copper wire can carry a lot of data, a lot more than one phone call. And essentially with switching technology and Cisco routers, we were able to replace the Class 5. And voice over IP was one of those things that we thought very early on, we can replace the long distance phone call. Next time Larry Goldberg calls me from South Africa, I don't have to run to the phone, get our conversation. We can just have a casual conversation as long as we want, because we're not thinking about $15 a minute.
So you started this ISP, this service provider, the internet service provider. You expanded to voice over IP.
Right.
And so where did this business go? What?
So think about it in the beginning, and now take the Air Force brat mentality of you got to make friends really fast, right? And in the beginning, this is 1993, 92. Nobody even knows what the internet was. And so I would call chambers of commerce and Rotary clubs and say, hey, I want to come talk about this new thing called the internet. And, I can show you this picture. You hold up a business card and you say, this is an email address. So nobody knew what an email address was. Nobody knew what the @ sign was at the time. And I would explain, this is an email address. This is how it works. It's going to replace faxes. And most people would go, that guy's a kook.
Yeah.
So that was sort of the beginning of the internet. One of my favorite kind of realizations was the Summer Olympics 1996 was the first time on a television set. And back then, the television sets were those cathode ray tubes, right? But the first time I saw, at the bottom, it said, for more information, go to www. And I thought, Finally, the world is catching up.
So this ISP of yours had retail clients or all commercial clients?
Retail and commercial. In the beginning, internet providers did everything. We did website design, hosted the websites.
How did you get your customers? I mean, what was the business model?
It was probably one of the easiest growth companies I've ever seen.
Right.
It was one of those, if you build it, they will come. I was so surprised. We started in a small Denton, Texas, and then we grew to Louisville and then Dallas and then all over Texas. But people found us. We didn't have to do that much marketing for them to find us. And we started filling rooms with modems, and the phone companies loved us because they'd bring big trunks of phone lines so we could connect modems. But then, of course, we realized that it's not fast enough. We've got to do more. And in the internet company, I think in the beginning, modems and connectivity to the internet, and then voice over IP. But the next thing was streaming video. If we can stream audio, why can't we stream video? And then I started going back to those same chambers and Rotary clubs and saying, in 10 years, everybody's going to be watching video on the internet rather than cable TV.
Another kooky idea.
I know, it was a super kooky idea.
So when did you start bringing fiber into the company? Did you?
We actually didn't bring fiber in when I was there.
Okay.
The last great piece of innovation that we did was something called DSL. So DSL was a way of taking the standard phone line that would go into your home or into a business and hooking it up so it looked more like Ethernet. And rather than getting the 28.8K, you could get a megabit per second.
Right.
And that was just amazing.
Okay, so we've progressed from running an energy company, not running an energy company, but being, motivating yourself within an energy company and motivating them to building an ISP. And then what happened?
Somebody came in and bought us. We had that out-of-body experience, a liquidity event. The great part about the liquidity event is in 1998, about October, I brought in a really well-known CEO to replace me, and I stepped into the chairman's role. And about a month later, that brand new minted CEO comes into my office and he says, "We need to call a board meeting." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "I think we need to close the company." I thought he was joking at first. And he said, "We don't have money for payroll on December 31st. And I said, "David, I've had payday when I didn't have enough money for payroll. Let's fix the problem." And he goes, "I've called everybody. I don't know how to do this." And so I said, "Let me take over. I'll get it taken care of." So I went out to the market, raised the capital. And in the process of raising the capital, one of the Hunt families found our company and put together a term sheet to buy us for $122 million. So this is a classic story of the traditional, mainstream, very qualified business executive stepping into an entrepreneurial company. And it's a different skill set. He was ready to close it down. I figured out how to keep it. And in that time when we were fixing the problem, somebody comes in and offers us $122 million for the company. And that transaction, when it happened just 2 months later, I passed the baton back to David so that he could run the company through the transition. And all of a sudden I was rich. And I called a bunch of my friends and I said, "I've always wanted to climb Kilimanjaro. And if you'll come with me, I'll pay all your expenses. I'll buy all your training equipment." So I put together a team of 5 people and we started training on mountains.
Wait. We've just gone to Mount Kilimanjaro from...
Well, we haven't gotten to Kilimanjaro yet. We're training for it.
Okay, but I want to ask, why Mount Kilimanjaro?
Yeah.
I mean, I come from Africa. I know Mount Kilimanjaro. I don't know a handful of Americans who actually know where Mount Kilimanjaro is.
Right. Well, when I was a little kid, my father traveled around the world as a communications guy for the Air Force.
Okay.
The Air Force was installing downlinks for the upcoming space program.
Right.
And so they wanted near equatorial and my dad was in Tanzania and Kenya setting up a downlink, and he came back telling stories of this great mountain, Kilimanjaro. And so I heard that very cool name when I was a little kid, and it just stuck.
You loved the name.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
And the funny thing, we climbed Kilimanjaro, and we should talk about the unicorns on Kilimanjaro. But the one thing that I realized, you get to the summit of Kilimanjaro, which is not an easy task. We took the hard route. We did ice climbing.
How many is the we? How many?
There were 5 of us on my team, and then of course Tanzanian law says you have to have X number of porters, X number of guides, and so we had 2 guides. I think our team of Africans was 12. And it was great because, you hike all day long with a light backpack. They carry all the gear. You get to your campground, your tent is already set up. Yeah. The food is ready. It's concierge. You work pretty hard, but of course these guys are carrying 50 pounds, 100 pounds on their head, walking up this mountain.
So what year was this that you had?
2000.
Like 2000.
Yeah.
Good grief. That's that. From a timing point of view, it was perfect.
Yeah.
You sold just before the crash.
Yeah, sort of, yes.
When you say sort of.
Well, on paper, I was worth a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I was able to liquidate some of it. A few $100,000. And the new company that bought us was a publicly traded company.
So you got stock. Yeah.
So we closed our transaction in March of 2000, climbed Kilimanjaro in June of 2000. So we just celebrated the 25th anniversary of summiting Kilimanjaro, my team and I did. And so I was locked up until March of 2001. You remember that summer?
Oh, yeah, do I remember.
Boy, the bubble crashed. What's funny is I was working part-time as an astronomy professor, and I remember one day in the fall when my net worth was still really high on books.
Okay, yeah.
And I remember walking in and teaching my astronomy class, and I remember saying, I lost $1 million today. It was sort of funny. I mean, how many people can say they lose $1 million and keep a smile on their face? It wasn't funny about a month later when the million, and it went all the way down to zero. So, it was a great life lesson. And
yeah, I know very few successful entrepreneurs who haven't lived that particular journey.
Right.
I will tell you, I sold my company in 1999, in June of 1999.
Okay, good timing.
Yes, and the company I sold to was an Israeli-based public company,
mm-hmm.
and I got stock in their company, and I also got options in their company, all of which went very close to nothing afterwards. Right. But fortunately, there was only a portion of the buyout, but it was a bitter lesson. And I remember so many people from those days, struggling and going through what you went through.
Yeah.
One fellow I know, over $50 million disappeared in 3 months from zero. So I've seen quite a few of those stories. But yeah. So there you are. You're really a full-blooded entrepreneur because you've gone from 0 to 1 and from 1 to 0.
Yep. That's exactly right.
And now you're a professor, a part-time professor, right. A part-time mountain climber. And what else? What was next?
I had written a couple books, but let's go back to Kilimanjaro because there's some really good stories on Kilimanjaro. Byron Brooks was one of the team members, and I had known Byron since high school. When my dad was stationed at the Pentagon, I had met Byron. And Byron and I competed all the time. So another man who was constantly pushing me, and I was constantly pushing him. But when we went to Kilimanjaro, Byron was an electrical engineer, medical doctor. He was a little bit miffed by the fact that in one transaction I had made more money than he was going to make his entire life. And Byron was one of these guys who really wasn't cut out to be an entrepreneur. They had great ideas. So climbing Kilimanjaro, I mentioned the unicorns that are on Kilimanjaro.
Yeah.
We found one of them, and it was called Teladoc. The whole time we were climbing, we were talking about, okay, what could we build? What could we build? And I remember the night before summit, Byron is in his tent, and I saw the lights on. We're supposed to be going to sleep like at 6 o'clock in the evening because we started at 11 p.m. right before midnight to do the summit.
Yeah.
And the lights are on. I go over. It's pretty cold, and I say, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I've got patients back in the U.S. I need to take care of them." And at first I was angry because now Kilimanjaro has a cell phone tower. Then it was my satellite dish charging $25 a minute or some insane amount. I go, "You're using my satellite dish to talk to?" Wait. You can do that? You can talk to patients on the phone and treat them remotely? And he goes, "Yeah, I have their medical record right here." And I went, "That's a business model."
Wow.
And so that was the beginning. Another great story about Byron. He's African American, and so all of our guides and porters also Black Africans. And I realized that they see the Black Americans as the heroes that went off in this diaspora and did great things. And, the way they treated him was like he was a major hero. He was an engineer. He was a medical doctor.
Right.
And, he had accomplished the greatness of the American dream. But if you speak Swahili, the word for brother is kaka. And they kept calling him kaka. And I've known this guy my entire life. And I'm like, what's this kaka thing? Yeah. So we got to play around with that for a few years as well.
Yeah, I've had fun with that word as well in my career. I'm ex-South African, so have and we traveled in Africa as well, although not Tanzania, which in the early days of my life, Tanzania was part of Federation, the Rhodesian Federation, so it didn't actually exist as a separate country. But that's another long story. So here we have the founding years of a great founder. You've already founded one company, sold it, lost all that money, and now you have this concept of Teladoc. Well, it's one of the many businesses or companies you founded. Yeah. Tell us about how did Teladoc actually evolve in real?
I didn't realize how difficult it was going to be. In the beginning, it felt like a telephone, an electronic medical record, a doctor, and a patient.
Simple as that.
Yeah. It seemed simple, except there were no real electronic medical records.
Right.
But we built our own. And, that was a task in its own because there were electronic medical records. Doctors hated them. And the first version we built, the doctors hated. And so finally I went into the doctor's offices and I said, "What are you doing now?" And they'd show me a clipboard, where they'd write. And there were, 4 or 5 different versions of that clipboard. And so I just went back to my programmers and I said, "These documents, I want the interface to look exactly like this. We'll ask the doctor, which version are you using?" And every time they log on, give them that. And then all of a sudden the doctors liked it because all the fields were already populated. They didn't have to go in and write patient's name and birth and address.
But take us back to the formation of Teladoc. Byron had this great, you had this epiphany seeing Byron doing the remote thing. How did that translate into starting a company, building that company? Let's go to the...
Well, at the time, Byron had 2 jobs. He was working as a flight surgeon at NASA, so he was already kind of doing that work, and he was working at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston.
Okay.
And so there were resources there. We started talking about how do we put this all together. And for him, it was medicine and concept. For me, I had to put together a business model.
Right.
And so I started working on who do we sell this to? And in the beginning, we filed articles of incorporation. I wanted to do a year of testing just so we would be everything.
Where's the money coming from? Did you raise?
I had capital.
Okay.
In the beginning, I funded it. And we put together a pilot group of 100, 150 patients.
Wow.
And one of my favorite ones is a guy named Nelson who wakes up one morning. He's overweight. Everything in the world is wrong with him. Something's wrong with his leg when he wakes up. And his wife says, go to the doctor. And he said, no, I've got an important meeting today. My company is going to make a lot of money if I make it to the meeting. And he's driving to the meeting and he's thinking, I'm going to try this thing called Teladoc that I've agreed to use. And so he does. And it was actually Dr. Brooks who took the call. Dr. Brooks listened to his symptoms and he said, Nelson, go to the ER right now.
Yeah.
And so even though his wife had said, go to the doctor, when a doctor says it, has an impact. And it was those early kind of stories like that that made me understand the value of what we were doing. What I didn't know yet was the resistance that was going to happen.
Right.
And so as we came out of our pilot and we started signing up people, I called Dr. Brooks and one of his colleagues, Dr. Boltinghouse, and I said, we need to go to the Board of Medical Examiners and tell them what we're doing. And Dr. Boltinghouse, and he said, no, we don't. And I said, yeah, I think we do. And he said, no, the board calls you when you're in trouble and they have their own court system, their own judges. We don't want to go. And I didn't listen. I went there and I brought Boltinghouse and Brooks with me. Dr. Brooks, when he comes to Austin, he still shakes remembering that day. We went in. I told the board with great passion what we were doing and how this was going to solve the access problem in healthcare. We were going to get doctors to patients in minutes rather than days. And the board listened to us and they looked at me and they said, Mr. Gorton, if you build this company, you will go to prison. And Dr. Brooks, Boltinghouse, will take your medical licenses and then you'll go to prison. So that was the beginning of understanding just how big a mountain this was.
What year was that?
03.
03. Mm-hmm. So Teladoc came to my notice, of course, when you guys went public.
Yeah.
Which was how many?
15.
So from 03 to 15, you struggled and battled against this bureaucracy.
Yes, we did.
And it was a serious battle.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
And at one point, the law came calling.
Oh, yeah. The law came calling a lot. So first of all, medicine in this country, the medical doctors are regulated by a group called the Board of Medical Examiners.
Right.
And there's one in each of the 50 states. And they can't ruin my life anymore. So I'll just say they're little fiefdoms. They have their kingdoms. They control the doctors in their state. And mostly for good. But they had decided that telemedicine should not be legal. And when we analyzed back in 2002, what are the big problems that telemedicine could solve, there was care across state lines. And, we joke around, I'm in Texas, our neighboring state is California or is Oklahoma. You're in North Carolina, maybe Tennessee would be yours. But, we can joke around and say, do I want an Oklahoma doctor treating me in Texas? Because we're Texans. But the reality is the Board of Medical Examiners does not want a Texas doctor treating an Oklahoma patient because they can't control that license. And so interstate medicine was an issue. The next issue was, is it appropriate to write a prescription
across state lines?
Yeah, across state lines, and then to tighten it up even more, would doctors be writing prescriptions for controlled substances like narcotics? Mm. And then the last one And this is the one that we decided we would fight. So we said, we're not going to practice across state lines. We're not going to write prescriptions for narcotics. But at Teladoc, what we said was, we think it is appropriate for a doctor to treat a patient that doctor has never touched. And when the day we came to the Texas Board of Medical Examiners, they were concerned about all three of these issues. A few months later, I went back to them and I explained to them, this is why it's appropriate. Number one, Texas doctor will only treat patient who's in Texas. You're in Texas now, but you're a North Carolina resident. Your North Carolina doctor cannot treat you today.
So I've got to, if I develop a problem, I can't call my doctor. I've got to go.
Well, you can call your doctor, but your doctor can't write a prescription that you could pick up.
I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we said we would not cross that line. We would not write narcotics prescriptions. And the way that we rationalized treating a patient the doctor had never touched, we said, this has been going on since the beginning of the telephone. And the board said, explain. And what we said was, look, Dr. Brooks cannot work 24 hours a day. So what Dr. Brooks does is he finds 4 or 5 colleagues and he says, okay, you cover on Tuesdays, you cover on Thursdays. And if I'm Dr. Brooks's patients and a Tuesday and Bolting House gets my call, he can treat me. I've never met this guy before. He doesn't have my medical record. He's not going to get paid, but he's covering on Tuesday nights for Dr. Brooks. Right. And that is called cross coverage. And so we sort of laid this out for the Texas Board of Medical Examiners, and they said, yeah, okay, I see. You're fixing it because now Bolting House has my medical record, can see my history. Bolting House is going to get paid. Teladoc is covering Bolting House's medical malpractice. And Bolting House now has a reason to call me back. Back in the old cross coverage days, the doctors would get paged and they would go, I'm busy with this, I'm busy with that. But the Teladoc doctors we had a guarantee. And by the time this came around, we were getting doctors to patients in 12 minutes.
So Teladoc is now active and moving, and it's bringing in some cash.
Yes.
And you're financing, you're building a business that's already cash flow positive? Or?
No. I was still funding it. I started bringing angel investors in.
Okay.
In 2004, we raised our first real round of capital.
Okay, so this is your A round.
Yeah.
Functionally.
And our capital raise was a relatively small group out of Birmingham, Alabama, called New Capital Partners, and they became a really good partner.
Right.
They funded our early expenses and got us through to when we really needed to raise a big round.
Yeah, and you told me about some of the run-ins with the law. You had you were raided. Tell us about that.
This is such a great story because I think the precursor to it is I began to understand how important it was that everybody at Teladoc understand the impact of what we were doing, the potential to change healthcare, but also the resistance. And in building companies, you have to surround yourself by people who are smarter than you, and you have to listen to them, and you have to inspire. One of your jobs as CEO is to be the cheerleader and figure out everybody's potential, everybody's strengths and weaknesses, and constantly lift those people up because you can't do it by yourself.
Right.
And so we spent a lot of time getting everybody to understand what Teladoc could become as a potential to change healthcare. But also, if you believe in what you're doing, it doesn't matter what kind of threats come your way. And my favorite version of this, and everybody who's ever worked with me knows the Leonidas story. What Leonidas did was he found those 300 soldier.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I wanted you just to give our audience an understanding of who Leonidas was.
Yeah.
I mean,
okay. So
he was the
Spartan
that led the
300 against 300,000 or a million. We don't know how many.
Some movie that's been made of this, I'm sure, in recent years. But I mean, he is the great, leader of the 300 that defended Sparta to the death,
right,
and defeated this massive army. So
how does a general convince 300 people to go up against an army of somewhere between 300,000 and a million?
Yeah,
those soldiers knew that they would say when the Persians started, the first thing they would do is they would flight a few arrows. If everybody in the Persian army flights 2 or 3 arrows, how many arrows are going to be in the air?
Yeah,
a million?
Yeah.
And I've thought about this a few times. As a mathematician, I want to think about, okay, how many, what does that look like? But what Leonidas' advisors told him was, there will be so many arrows in the sky that it'll black out the sun. And Leonidas thought about it, and he said, then we'll fight in the shade. And
now he did choose a very narrow path.
Yeah, he did.
He did hide behind, this very narrow path and forced the Persians to, anyway.
Yes, he did. He did. So there was a lot of strategy, but I think the point that's relevant to Teladoc is this. Leonidas said that he will only select, you could go through ChatGPT and say, hey, give me a list of everything that a soldier would need. And it'll give you all these bullet points. But Leonidas had a secret one. And that was, we need athletic guys who are, great wielding swords and spears and shields and everything else. But Leonidas only selected for that 300 people who had somebody back at home that they loved, a child or a wife. Because what Leonidas knew was that nobody was going to run. In fact, I tell entrepreneurs this all the time. What is the opposite of fear? And I have them think about it, while I'm talking about this. What is the opposite of fear? And Leonidas knew the opposite of fear. And it's not courage. It's, if you love what is behind you, you're not going to run or hide. There's a great line about if there's a grizzly bear, a mom, and a child, we feel sorry for the grizzly bear because that mom is not going to let that grizzly bear get to that child. So the opposite of fear is love. And what we did at Teladoc early on was we made sure that everybody understood what they were fighting for, why it was important. That's what they had to love that was behind them. And so now we'll go back to the story that you were asking about. I'm sitting in my office. It's probably 2005. We probably have, 250, 300,000 patients nationwide, lots and lots and lots of growth. And I'm sitting with my management team, and Ruthie walks into my office, and she never does when I'm in a meeting. So I already know something's up. She whispers in my ear, the DEA is here with guns and badges.
And the DEA is the Drug
Enforcement Agency.
Yeah.
That you go from, a strategy planning session to all of a sudden you're pounded on that microphone, but that's the point. Your heart is beating like crazy. And I'm walking down the hallway, and I'm at the very end of a very long hallway, and so I have to go by everybody's offices, and I look into their eyes. And by the time I get to the conference room, I realize that all that prep work was right. We had Leonidas phalanx in our office. Everybody was ready for this day. And so I walk into the conference room, and there's 3 DEA guys, and their job is intimidation.
They're flak jackets.
They're wearing flak jackets. They've got sidearms, and they've got M16s.
Right.
These guys are ready for a war, which we weren't. Now, this is Texas, but nobody had their license to carry back then, at least that I knew of. So I looked at the lead guy. I tried to shake his hand. He wouldn't shake my hand. And I said, what can I help you with? And he said, well, we think that Teladoc is an engine for writing prescriptions for narcotics. And I smiled at him and I said, thank God. And I sat down. And I think that kind of threw him off because he was expecting me to quake. And he said, well, you can tell me that you're not doing this, but we're going to tear apart every file. And so for the next 3 months, that's exactly what they did. My team, they would come in, we'd offer them coffee, water, welcome them. They were never nice to us. And we spent 3 months with them taking pieces apart. And they didn't close us down, thankfully, for whatever reason. I've thought it was because we had some major clients, but they never closed us down. I remember very distinctly the morning that I walked into the office a little bit late, and the lead guy, who my team had all secretly called him Mr. Grumpy because he was never nice to anybody.
Right.
And he just looked at me and he said, your office now. And now we're doing the opposite of that, walk down the hallway.
Yeah, you're going the other way.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking, I don't know which doctor did it. I don't know how he got away with it. But before I go to prison, I'm going to kill him. So, and we get into the office. The DEA guy closes the door. He sits down and he says, we love Teladoc. And I said, what? And he said, yeah, my agents, when they're around the country and they get sick, we haven't had a solution, but now we do. And I said, whoa, can you reel back a little bit? Are we done here? And he said, and he said, yes. And that guy who had been intimidation for 3 months, all of a sudden became a real person. And he was friendly with me. And he had done his job. He had found that we weren't writing prescriptions for narcotics. In fact, we developed an engine so that it couldn't work inside of our system. If a doctor decided a prescription needed to be written, they would notate that in the medical record. They would never call in the prescription. It would alert a nurse who would review the consultation, and if there was a prescription, call it in.
And that nurse was employed by Teladoc.
Us. Yeah.
So Teladoc now gets through this huge, opposition from the legacy, medical community and the legal community. And financially, how does it get to? I guess you went public, right?
Yes.
And what year did you go public?
2015 is.
So 2005 to 2015 was the.
There was a lot of growth.
And a lot of growth, and you're still running the show?
No. In the summer of 2009, we brought in a man who really knew healthcare. So I've read some of your writing. You really know healthcare. I'm an innovator. I'm sort of a fast on the feet kind of guy. I wish I understood healthcare as well as you do.
By the way, I don't understand healthcare. I have studied healthcare, and I use the understandings of the people I study and have, elucidated that in my writings, but I don't really understand healthcare.
You've written a 65-page document that could be a graduate course in understanding healthcare. It's extraordinary.
Just based upon readings of other people's writings. But anyway,
So in the summer of 2009, it was time for me to step out. And I think every great founding entrepreneur needs to know their starting point and their ending point.
That was always my great failing. I always thought I knew everything. I had to become old to understand I know nothing. It takes a while.
Yeah,
but
I get that.
But this is remarkable. This is the second startup that you've had that you've stepped down and put somebody else in charge.
Exactly. And we found a man named Jason Gorvick, who was an up-and-comer. He really understood healthcare well, and he had great relationships with the big payers. Mm-hmm. And brought him in the summer of 2009. And Jason did an amazing job. I stepped out of the company because I had learned in the Internet global era that my slot as chairman in that office was always a problem for David, because when all of those employees had issues, they came to me, not to him.
No, I know.
And you bring a Jason Gorvick in who has that kind of talent, who has that kind of vision, and you let him run.
Right.
And so I stepped out completely. I went from stepping out of Teladoc in the summer of 2009 to leaving the board in the spring of 10 to starting a solar power company. That big a difference, because I felt like my child Teladoc was now in good hands with Jason, and I could just let it go off and get married.
And so you stepped out before it went public. You were already in your solar company.
Yep.
And when it went public, you still had your stock, and you were participated in that.
Yep.
That's an amazing story. That is an amazing story.
Yeah.
So, how many other enterprises have you spawned in this lifetime?
Well, there was a little bit of a gap there that between the actual filing of articles of incorporation of Teladoc and the end of Internet Global. Teladoc was number 8.
Wow.
Yeah.
So,
Internet Global was number 3. And so there was
So you had the computer company,
right.
And then... So all in all, I mean, let's just encompass this whole lifetime of startups. How many startups have you
15.
spawned? 15.
15 that were my startups.
Right.
I've worked with a bunch of, I don't even count anymore, the number of entrepreneurs that I like what they're doing. You and I are working with one called Sensei right now.
Right.
And in those kind of deals, you look for an extraordinary executive who
Correct.
really understands something, who has a technology that can change everything,
Correct.
that has big potential revenue. And then the other thing that I think is really important, and you and I think get this really well, and that is, can I help? Can I do something that that impacts this company?
Right.
And so Teladoc was number 8, and but I built a record label. You know, we were talking when we were setting up all the equipment today about audio equipment.
Right.
And I was lucky enough to marry an extraordinary woman who was a great musician, and she was on the big stages. And you know how engineers are. You see all this cool equipment and you go, I want to learn how to run that.
I've been there.
Yeah, I know.
So 15 companies supporting a lot of entrepreneurs, and I happen to know just how many entrepreneurs, well, some of the many entrepreneurs you're supporting. But you have another whole profession we haven't even touched on.
Right.
You're an author.
Yes. In the 90s, I decided to write a book, and it was long before ChatGPT, but I remember I told my wife, I have this novel in my head. I need to get it.
Right.
And it was early December, so it was during the Internet Global time period, so things had slowed down a little bit over the December month. And by the first week of January, that novel was done. It was a 400-page novel. I mean, but it was just, and I'm not a good typist, so hammering away on the keyboard and then sending it to some friends to edit and clean up the grammaticals. And it was before self-publishing was a big deal. But the book did really well, so I wrote a sequel to it. And then I thought, well, I need to write a couple business books. So I wrote a couple business books, and I think around 2015 or so, I wrote a book that I thought, this one could be a #1 bestseller. It was a historical fiction book that I called Forefathers and Founding Fathers, about the early colonies in America. And sure enough, I got a couple of awards. It became a #1 bestseller. Brown Books called me and said, hey, can we take this book? And so they did. And so all of a sudden, I was a #1 best-selling, award-winning author signed by a major publishing company. And that was kind of fun.
And how many books are behind you now and by now?
Well, I'm a few days away from number 10.
Wow.
And the stories we were telling about Teladoc is number 10. We just gave the book a name yesterday. It's Telemedicine Wars. And so some of the stories we've talked about and a lot more are in that book.
Right.
And we decided to make it into a fiction book. The father of telemedicine is a man named Jay Sanders, who created the idea in 1968. And I asked Jay to help me build Teladoc early on. And Jay didn't like the fact that Teladoc was just a telephone. He wanted video. And video was really hard in the beginning. And so Jay said no, he didn't want to help me. Later, Jay became an advisor of the company, and he always wished he had taken in the beginning because he would have gotten so much more stock and made so much more money. But in 2022, I called him, and now Jay and I have kind of a father-son relationship. He's turning 89 this year.
Good grief.
Yeah. And so I called him and I said, "Hey, Dad, let's write a history of telemedicine." And he said to me, "Michael, I'm really old. We're going to have to write fast." So we wrote the book, and it became a #1 bestseller. Mark Victor Hansen published it in his book publishing company. And then about 3 months ago, I called him again and said, "Hey, let's turn that book into a fiction." Because then there was an old TV show on in the U.S. I don't know if you had it in South Africa, called Dragnet. This guy would come on and
it was long before television came to South Africa. Television came to South Africa very late.
Oh.
It was the early 80s. The mid-70s that television came to South Africa.
Yeah.
I think Dragnet was over by then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember at the beginning of Dragnet, the guy would come on and he'd go, "The stories you're about to hear are true. The names have been changed to protect the innocent." Right. So that's kind of the thesis of the Telemedicine Wars book. We tell all the stories in great detail, but none of the real names.
So I think you rank, pretty high in the stakes of Mavericks. I mean, it's an extraordinary multiplicity of careers.
Right.
What's ahead? Where does Michael go from here?
I think the next generation of science fiction that I'm writing, which seems really far from all the rest of this stuff, but storytelling is how you connect people, and it's how you teach people. And what I'm doing in science fiction right now is taking brand new, really difficult concepts and turning them into stories that have impact. And all of the books until now have been just for fun, but I started this series called Tachyon Tunnel, which is about to have its 3rd of 4 books. And the goal there is to do something much bigger, to inspire like Tolkien did, or like Asimov did, or Heinlein. Take that kind of magnitude stories and put it down into the modern vernacular, but use the new science. Tachyon is a strange word, a Greek word.
Yeah.
But a tachyon is a particle that moves faster than light. And so therefore it coexists before it exists. And the things that we do with it in the story are just fun. And you can travel through time, and there's so much in that book. It's probably, but the bottom line is that taking really arcane scientific topics, making them understandable, and bringing them into the mainstream. And I think when I was a college professor, I taught a science class at a community college, and all of those kids in that class were terrified because they were required to take 2 science classes, and they weren't scientists.
Yeah.
And my goal every single semester was to take them from the beginning of the semester being terrified to the end of the semester loving science and being willing to pick up an article about science and just read it, because they know that science and engineering are what's transforming their world. And if they can't read it, if they can't feel comfortable with it, they're going to fall behind. So that was the goal of teaching. That's the goal of these books.
Very good. Well, you certainly qualify as a maverick. It just fascinates me to understand how many careers, how many paths you've been on in your life. It's extraordinary, and I'm going to be watching your next path, and because
you and I are on a common path right now.
We are.
You think about Kathy Wood. A lot of people know who Kathy is. For just for a quick explanation, Larry and I sit in a brainstorming group that Kathy hosts every Friday. I remember the first time she said, "Would you like to join?" It sounded fascinating. Some of the smartest people on the planet all getting together. And she said, "It's every Friday for 2 hours." And I just thought, there's no way I'm going to be able to do that.
Right.
But I'll join one of the times.
But it is easily 2 of the best hours of the week for me every week. And I try as hard as I can to make sure I'm there.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm not able to be there.
Yeah.
But it's a great experience, and it's where we became, I guess, where we formed our relationship.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for being on Maverick Mind. I think you're one of the most fascinating mavericks I've met, and I've really enjoyed this time we've spent together.
In a couple of years, you and I need to have a big gathering of all the mavericks.
We'll do that.
What a fun time that would be.
We'll do that. Thank you.
All right.
Michael.
Thank you.